and welcome to Undercover. I'm your host, Kevin Bousquet. Now, we are picking up where we left off in our last show, where we've been talking about surveillance with my guest, Paul Ancorn. Now, if you missed the last show, I'll just walk you through a bit about the background of my guest, Paul Ancorn. Paul Ancorn is a certified surveillance specialist, and he does surveillance for corporations, insurance companies. That's his specialty. He has probably close to 30 years in the business. He's authored a couple of books, and he teaches to the various colleges in Ontario about private investigation and security. Paul, welcome again to our program.
Thank you, Kevin.
So here we are in an actual surveillance van. I thought it would be fun to bring the crew out here and to let you see exactly what it's like being in a surveillance van. It's very, very cramped. Now, Paul's going to walk us through just some of the equipment that's involved in surveillance. And just to recap, because I know when I talk about surveillance in general, the public gets a little insecure, or they start to feel a little intimidated about surveillance. So, Paul, give us an idea, as we talked in the last show, who is it that's hiring a guy like you?
Principally, Kevin, it's large corporations, it's lawyers, it's insurance companies. Insurance companies are actually the largest, the most prevalent consumer for surveillance investigators and authorizing surveillance investigations. They're not the only ones. Big corporations as well for things such as injured employees who are on WSIB or collecting benefits under the company's group health plan. Also large corporations who have a theft problem, and they suspect that the theft is by employees or from outside sources, and we're trying to obviously find out who it is that's committing these crimes and apprehend them. On the rare occasion nowadays, you do get individuals hiring investigators if they suspect their spouse or their girlfriend or boyfriend is not being...
Okay, let's just back up. Like, one of the stigmatisms that I've always put up with in my entire career is, you know, when I meet someone or something like that and I have to tell them what it is I do for a living, I go, well, I'm a private investigator. Right off the bat, they think, you know, oh, are you one of those guys who has office above a store, and I take it you follow ex-wives to see if they're cheating? I mean, is that still a big part of the business? Can you maybe explain to the crowd how...
Actually, that's a very small part of the investigation business today. Because of changes to the Divorce Act, it's no longer necessary to prove adultery. So it's really a rather small part of it. More times than not, it's you know, people, they need to know for themselves before they want to initiate a divorce proceeding whether their suspicions are true. Maybe they're unfounded, and you know, that's probably a good thing.
Okay, is it fair to say, can you give us a percentage? You know, if I was to walk in the front door of a private investigative agency in Canada, it sounds to me like what you're telling me is that the majority of agencies are doing primarily surveillance work. Can you give me an idea what percentage would be surveillance work as it relates to insurance work?
Probably 80% or more is surveillance work.
As it relates to insurance, correct?
Insurance and or WSIB investigations.
Okay. Now, let me just throw this example at you. You know, with the Privacy Protection Act and, you know, changes to the various acts, what do you think would happen if all of a sudden insurance companies were not allowed to investigate their claims via surveillance, like people like yourself? What do you think would happen, in your view?
Quite honestly, the industry would probably crumble.
Okay.
And in fact, there are some jurisdictions where there are very strict restrictions on corporations, be they insurance companies or private companies, from doing surveillance on people. BC, for instance, has very, very strict privacy legislation, and I have been told specifically by the registrar out in BC that it's had a very negative impact on the industry.
And I can imagine what they're paying for insurance claims, because one of the things that people don't realize is that insurance companies aren't allowed to investigate their claims. The only place you're going to feel it is in your premiums, because if they can't investigate, all they're going to do, if they can't underwrite, they can't basically know that they're going to go into something being able to recoup their loss, that you're going to pay it in your premiums. So, anyways,
well, not just insurance companies but companies too. For instance, with WSIB claims, and if you rely on the WSIB to initiate the investigation on a suspicious employee, you know what? You're going to be paying through the nose for a long period of time, because quite honestly, in Ontario, WSIB would rather investigate the companies, the employers, as opposed to the employees who may be perpetuating fraudulent claims.
Okay. So now, Paul, maybe you could just kind of walk us through some of the equipment. Let's talk first of all on a standard kind of a surveillance. We're watching someone who's cheating the system. Maybe that person's working under the table for cash. At the same time, they're claiming a disability, and myself, the general public, insurers, we're all paying for that person to, pay and basically work under the table for cash and work with an injury. Walk us through some of the daytime equipment that you use.
Okay, generally speaking, the day-to-day equipment that is in use by professional investigators is videotape cameras, as well as still cameras. Now, most modern videotape cameras today do enable you to extract pictures directly from the videotapes.
Oh, good point.
And a lot of companies, in order to save money, and investigators, in order to save money, just abandon altogether the use of still cameras. And that's a rather negative way to go about it, because every video camera made has what's called a power-up delay. It takes a few seconds from the time you power up the camera to when you can start videotaping or recording an image. And sometimes all you're going to get is a fleeting glimpse of activity that's of relevance or importance. Whereas with a professional SLR-style digital camera, there's no power-up delay. You turn it on, bang, you can take a picture instantly. In fact, there have been numerous cases I've done over the past 10 years where I've been using a digital SLR, and I was probably the first PI in all of Ontario to be using a professional SLR-style digital SLR camera. And there have been numerous cases over the years where if I had not been using this expensive equipment, I would have missed the opportunity to capture the subject of the investigation doing exactly what I was being paid to capture them doing.
Now, how long can, okay, you follow a guy into work, I'm assuming if the person's working for cash in a construction yard or something, like what time do you start in the morning to try and catch these guys?
I generally start pre-dawn hours, sometimes depending on the person's background and the type of work that they might be doing. That could be a 3 o'clock in the morning start. Other times it would be 5 o'clock. The very, very latest that I would start working would be 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning.
So this must be very hard on your personal life if you have a family and you have kids?
It's extremely difficult on personal lives, with regardless of whether you have kids or not.
Okay.
It's very hard on your personal life because it does take a lot of hours. It's man-hour intensive, which is what makes surveillance very expensive.
Now, how long can you stay in this van? Like, say, for example, like, what do you do about things like if you got to leave the van, like to buy, if you want to go eat something, or like, how long can you stay in this van?
I don't.
Because I feel very claustrophobic in here.
You bring up two very interesting points, Kevin. It is very claustrophobic, and that's why a lot of people are they don't have the personality trait, the characteristics needed to be a good surveillance investigator. You have to be very self-reliant. You have to have the patience of Job. You have to be very focused and be able to focus your attention for hours and hours and hours on end, with tunnel vision, basically, because all you're looking out is one window, generally speaking. So all around you, you can't see what's going on if you're doing surveillance properly. So you have to be very, very patient individual. And quite honestly, most people, their attention span is only a half hour to an hour, and then they start fidgeting or wanting to read or watch television or do something, and they're not focusing their attention. So it's very tough. The second interesting point that you make is, what do you do if you have to go to the bathroom, which happens to us all? You have to eat regularly in order to keep your energy level up, and in order to stay focused, you have to eat. Well, I'll be honest, the vast majority of investigators will break off their surveillance and drive to the local Tim Hortons, Donuts, or McDonald's to get something to eat. And as anybody who has ever worked for me knows, I fire people for doing that. You should take food with you, take coffee with you, take lots of water because you have to hydrate even in the wintertime, and take facilities along with you to enable you to have biological functions.
I just want to make a point, you know, in the first couple of years when I started in this business, I worked for the same agency as Paul, and it's not only that, but I mean, I ate poorly, you know, I slept poorly. You're right, I was eating out of, you know, Harvey's and McDonald's and stuff like, and the only thing I ever really got was a nice ulcer when it was all said and done at the end of the day. So, you know, eating and, you know, I mean, it must take a toll on not only your sleep pattern, but your digestive system. And
absolutely, which is why, and I say this in my textbooks, I teach to my college students, supplement your diet with vitamins, particularly vitamin A and vitamin D, because when you're in a van, the only time your body generates vitamin D is from sunlight, and it's very important to you. Vitamin A is good for your night vision capabilities. You can actually improve your natural night vision by supplementing vitamin A. And yes, diet is very important. It's important to eat healthy food. That's why I bring food with me. In the summertime, I will have a huge, large cooler in addition to the powered refrigerator that I keep behind the back seat. I keep a stove in my vehicle. I keep food that I can cook if I'm going to be more than 15 or 16 hours. In the wintertime, I always have a thermos of soup because just eating soup will increase your body temperature. So having hot meals in the wintertime is very important when you live in northern climates. For biological necessities, you have to do something. My personal favorite is to have a portable toilet.
Okay.
And I can tell you, people that I know who have been doing surveillance for years, that I've worked with in the past, I used to get a lot of teasing about that. And yet, now it's a very common trend because I can do whatever I have to. I've actually sat on a surveillance one time for 5 days without moving my vehicle. And prior to my doing that assignment, 3 other companies with 3 other investigators had done that guy, and they got nothing, and they got burned.
Now, Paul, I mean, I remember in the days that I used to do surveillance, you know, like I had to do surveillance before I got a van. I mean, the first couple of years, you know, I was in a normal vehicle, and I had to do surveillance in some pretty affluent neighborhoods where, you know, like everybody had, like some of these houses, like there were 3 garages, so there were very, very few people parking on the street, you know, and it would be like I would be the only vehicle on the street because I'm in some big wealthy neighborhood. Like, how do you deal with like suspicious vehicle? Like you're the only vehicle on the street. How do you handle that?
Well, Kevin, getting back to prior to the use of minivans, when I first started doing surveillance, there was no such thing as a minivan. The only vans were big utility work vans. So, I mean, it was a rarity. I used to use a car as well. Cars in those days didn't have tinted windows, and police were called far more often in those days. With the advent of the minivan and its popularity today, they're everywhere. So if you're using a minivan or an SUV or even a car with tinted windows and you're doing your surveillance properly, you should not be getting the police called on you. In the past 15 years, I can count on one hand the number of times I've had the police called on me, and every one of those times it was in a rural area near a farm. In the city, it doesn't happen because I do surveillance properly. I use curtains. I don't move around. I don't sit with my engine running. I don't leave. I don't go driving by the house every half hour or every half because I'm impatient. I get there early and I sit still. It goes back. You remember when we were in the militia? And when you were in the militia, you remember doing things like cover and concealment? One of the